Hi everyone, I'm Jeff Hall. I'm reporting to you from the Westford Museum, the original Westford Academy. And a few years ago I did a TV show called Westford Tales. And the purpose of the show was to feature different people in Westford who have had an impact in one way or another on the community. That first one I did was with June Kennedy, the year she was made Person of the Year by the Kiwanis. And it was a great interview. And I've been looking for people since, and then came the coronavirus and everything else that's kind of slowed things down. But today I have with me a good friend, a friend I've known for years, a person I have gone to for advice, a person who's inspired me in a lot of ways, and that is Mickey Crocker. I'd give you her entire resume, but it would take much too long. But I can tell you I have served on the board of trustees at Westford Academy with Mickey. She brought me on. I was with the Westford Alumni Association for a while with Mickey. But when I retired, Mickey advised me to stay active and make sure that you continue to give back to the community. She set that example. So much so that there was a room dedicated to her on Tabnick Road, and then across the street on 110, we are soon to have the Mickey Crocker Residences. So she will be immortalized for years to come, and she well should be. But you're welcome, Mick. Well, what I'm going to do, Mickey, is I'd like to talk, but I'd like to focus not on the background, career, such, but I'd like to focus on your time in Forge Village. This year we put together a booklet on Forge Village, giving the history, talking about the houses, the institutions, and you had a lot to contribute to that because you had seen so many through years, okay? All right, let's start with Palamo Street.
Where I was born.
Yes.
What do you want to know about Palamo Street?
Where you were born and who...
I was born upstairs on 12 Palamo Street. It's even on my Social Security number. My original Social Security card has 12 Palamo Street, Forge Village. So I'm a Forge Village girl.
Your parents were immigrants, am I correct?
Yeah. My father came here when he was 8 years old. My mother didn't come until she was 26. And she came to work in the mill, in Abbott Mill, because back then Abbott solicited people from Keithley and Russia and Canada. And my mother happened to be one of them.
And your dad?
My dad came when he was 8 years old. He was one of 12 children, and Abbott Worsted had a house built for them on 4 Orchard Street, and they lived there till they died.
The houses on Palamo Street, just to give you kind of a background, Abbott Worsted was such a key part of Forge Village that over the years, either the houses were built by them, or when a house came up for sale, they bought them and provided the residences to the people who worked there. Tell me, Mick, okay, so you grew up on Palamo Street.
With 28 boys.
With 28 boys, not all in one family, though.
I was a tom girl, tomboy or whatever.
Talk a little bit about the things that you did in Forge Village for entertainment as a young girl.
As a young girl, we played kick the can, run my seat run, take a giant step. Everybody on Palamo Street we felt like we were related. There was nobody ever locked the doors. You were welcome in every house. And we all thought we were related.
Well, that's okay. So that's the types of things that you did. You grew up in a depression, okay? Yeah. Born in 1928, am I correct, Mick?
Right.
Okay,
born. Long time ago last week.
So you're born in 1928.
Yeah.
So you grew up in a depression. Did you know you were poor?
had no idea we were poor because everybody was in the same boat.
Okay, so a couple of things I want to mention that were within the area. She'd at your store.
Yeah, the wassail, you could, I guess everybody had a book and nobody could read it but him. But he had shoes downstairs in the basement. And he was, like, when the people didn't have any money, he let them charge. Nobody ever went hungry because, thanks to wassail. And it took years. I remember my mother, it took years to pay him back. Yeah.
You know, I think back, having grown up in Graniteville, of the same type of a situation. My mother honored George Reeves' store, the Clover Farm store in Graniteville, and then when they closed, it was Roger Parent. We did not go to supermarkets. They just did not exist. But yeah, there's a couple of others. Flynn's Fish Market.
Up on Story Street, Mrs. Flynn, Mamie Flynn, she had fried fish and what do we call it? Wet fish. We used to get it. She used to give all of us a little bit of French fries, and we thought that was wonderful. Her daughter, Miriam Kelly, came from New York, and I had her in Cameron School, and I had her in Westford Academy. Yeah.
There were a lot of stores, and I want to get them in a few minutes, Mick. But I want to talk. You talked about playing kick the can, and all of that. But you went to the Cameron School.
12 years. 12 years, 8 years.
Okay. Grades 1 through 8, correct?
1 through 8, yeah, and I remember every single teacher.
Name a few.
First grade was Miss Thompson, Eleanor Thompson from Lowell. Ruth Walker was in the second grade. Letitia O'Clair was the third grade. Miriam Kelly was the fourth grade. Emma Stone was the fifth grade. Alice Remus from Graniteville was the sixth grade. And Miriam Kelly was the seventh grade, and Peter Perry was the eighth grade.
I wanted you to do that because I wanted to see if I ended up with any of those teachers later on. And sure enough, Peter Perry, when I was at the Rodenbush in 6th and 7th grade, was the principal at the time. And if I'm correct, he lived right here in Forge Village for a while.
He lived he married the girl next door. He married Mrs. Precious's daughter. Her name was Pamelia. I never heard of that maybe before. And then he lived right at the Groton Forge Village line down by the VFW. That's where he lived.
Okay. That's interesting. Any impressions, any great memories or sad memories of the Cameron School?
No, I just think, I don't know. The biggest thing in the thrill was, those great big rubber balls they used to have? Well, if you were picked to take it, you thought that was great. Yeah.
Okay, a couple of things. You had mentioned playing kick the can up on Palamo Street, but before we came in, you said a lot of your activity growing up in Forge Village centered around the pond, Forge Pond.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm going to mention a few things. Girls Shore, Sullivan Shore.
You forgot Boys Shore.
Boys Shore. Those two particularly on the pond, okay?
Yeah.
What did you folks do down there?
Oh, we went right behind the Cameron School, up on the top of the hill. And before the war, there were steps going down. But when the hurricane came in 1938, all the trees wrecked the steps. Nobody ever rebuilt them. But when I was going there, they used their dressing rooms, and they had, a wharf. They had the raft and everything. After the hurricane, it was just a pond. But that's where we swam. And in the winter, everybody went there when it snowed. Believe it or not, we had wooden shovels. They weighed a ton. everybody would go down and we would shovel off a rink. So we were there summer and winter. Yeah.
But you also told me at one time, Mick, that you didn't just skate on Forge Pond, you skated in a place called Nelson Swamp.
No, we skated, well, we used to skate on the mud hole that was between Palama Street and Abbott Street. But the kids from the other side of the tracks, they were on Nelson Swamp, and that's right now down behind Millworks.
That's correct. If you went into the Millworks, okay, and you saw that was the, so if you on the other side of the tracks, because I remember Jim Kaziniak telling me that, yeah, that's where they skated, down in Nelson Swamp, yeah. And there was an article here in the Lowell Sun from February 1937 saying that they are skating on Nelson's Pond in Forge Village in 1937. So there was a Grodno store located right there by the pond, too.
Yeah, the Grodno store was at the end of Pond Street, and I think that was Grodno number 1. Grodno number 2 was in Graniteville.
Did you honor that store at all?
Yeah, everybody did. They had good meat.
I can remember when the one in Graniteville had some of the best meat around at one time. They were known for it.
We did most of our shopping with CDAC up on Pine Street because it was local. Yeah.
So it was also known in the back area there as Sullivan's Shore.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about the Sullivan family.
Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan lived in that house, right? Well, it burned down, and unfortunately, he burned to death in that house. But it was interesting that their son was one of them that helped write the Bill of Rights, Francis. Mm-hmm. And after Sullivan Shore, we used to rent boats for 15 cents an hour. He would let us have the rowboats. But then I think, was it Murray's took it over? And Phil used to have his seaplane there. And I can remember when my kids were little, we went swimming there. Yeah, I don't know when they stopped doing that or when the town beach opened.
Well, I'll tell you, from my recollection, I do not remember the Sullivans. And Francis Sullivan never quite got the credit that he deserves for his contributions to the writing of the GI Bill of Rights. I know that the picture of the signing of the bill, which has Edith North Rogers right next to President Roosevelt, and right in the back is Francis Sullivan, okay? He worked for a congressman in Connecticut. And I think that we should take more recognition of those sorts of contributions because, hey, the GI Bill helped create the middle class in this country, and because it gave the soldiers coming home so much opportunity as a result of that. But Sullivan Shore, that was Sullivan Shore, and the Grodno store. One of the other things, though, so in that particular period of time, and you talked about Forge Pond, World War II. Okay, well, you were in high school in World War II, but I was told that they actually, from Fort Devens, had maneuvers, had amphibious maneuvers on Forge Pond.
I don't know that they had maneuvers, but they would bring the young soldiers in the big dump truck, the army truck, and they went swimming. Most of them were from the Yankee Division, mm-hmm. and the Yankee Division was practically wiped out in World War II. They all died. And they were just, I remember they were just young kids, 18, 19 years old, yeah.
My generation experienced that with Vietnam,
Yeah.
Mickey Soaring. Some from Forge Village that never came back as a result of it. But no boats or anything like that on Forge Pond, do you remember?
Yeah, you could rent a rowboat.
No, I'm thinking the Army having boats.
Oh, the Army, I don't remember them ever having, yeah. I don't think they had maneuvers. They came mostly for relaxation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I know that during World War II, as the time was winding down, A couple of things. One, we have a picture of the Abbott Band marching down into the center of town, celebrating close to the end of the war, I am sure. But there was an interesting article in the book we just did that showed an advertisement saying, "Work for victory at Abbott Worsted and Forge Village. No experience necessary, top pay, ride to work in comfort," with a little picture of a bus, group insurance plan now available for all employees, a movie house, a clubhouse, the finest cafeteria, free band instruction, and free medical service.
What do you want to ask me about that?
Sure, you tell us a little bit about all of that, Vic.
All I know is during the war, we had the kids from Westford Academy. We went in there, we worked 4 hours a night. We could not work on any khaki or navy because we had to be 18. So we used to work 4 hours just during the war. And I remember them coming from Lowell loaded with buses. They brought them out. Abbott was very, very good. And I can't think of anything else.
Well, okay, but those were during the war years, particular war years. But I'm sure you remember the memorial. It was a wooden memorial, which now is in the parking lot across from it.
And everybody wonders what happened to it. But and it was full. I think there was like so many young people from the mill, went into the service. There was no young boys working in the mill. They were all gone.
Did women take their place?
Yeah, exactly. You had to. Yeah.
That Rosie of the Riveter kind of a thing, right?
Yeah, well, most of the machinery was occupied by women anyway. The overseers were men, but like the spinners, the winders, the doffers, the twisters, they were all women. Yeah, so there was no men working there that I know of.
Well, one of the things I find, and once again I'm going to refer back to the book here, is something that Reggie Blowy put together in 1948. It was called the Quarter Century Club,
right.
Okay? And listing the names. And when I said parochial, my question to you, Mickey, is do you think you knew everybody in Forge Village?
Of course. We knew everybody in Forge and Granville.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, it was like, geez,
Yeah.
that's up on Story Street. I noticed when you talk about Story Street in this book, you gave Marilyn Day the list of people who lived there, okay? Yeah. I'm going to throw out a couple of names from this. Bobrick, Bruley, there were several of them, Reggie Blowy, Byron, Coffey, Sinsavage, here's one, Elizabeth Delaney.
Yeah, she lived to be 102.
108.
108. So
And I mentioned her, Vic, because that's who I bought my house from.
Right.
Yeah. And you knew her two nieces, right?
Pardon me?
You knew her nieces, Kay Hopper.
Oh, yeah, I'm still friendly with Mary. Mary and Kay. And it's funny, it was very interesting. We had a priest called Ambrose Walker, and he took about 5 young girls and treated or paid for them to go to Keith Hall. But Mary Delaney didn't. Her sister Kay did. Yeah.
Interesting. Like I said.
What's interesting is Mary went on to head all the elderly programs of community teamwork in Lowell. And she's in a nursing home, but she's still alive.
Some other names, Mickey and I, when I look at these names, the Holmeses, the Koskeshkos, the Kellys, of course, the Kavanaughs, Mary May Lord, the Lammies, the Mulligans, my gosh. Just to mention a few, of those. Those were very typical names. Those were the Forge Village names. And as you said, everyone knew everyone, right?
Yeah, we did.
Would you say with parochial, I mean, we talked a little bit before about, geez, you grew up, you went to the 8th grade, and then you went to the academy. What was that like?
That was a real awakening. They took everybody in the 8th grade and they brought us up to what is the Rodenbush now, and so that we would know who was going to be in the freshman class. And what's interesting is the whole 4 grades of Westford Academy when I was there was 124. That's all that was in there. And I think it was very interesting to meet people that we certainly didn't know them, from NAB, we called it Brookside, and Sergeant School and Cameron School, and that was it, just those 3 schools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it was a different experience. Okay, so 20 years later, I graduate in 66, you were 46, and we kind of went through the same experience. We were still somewhat parochial, Mickey, at the time, because I remember getting to the Rodenbush in 6th grade and saying, who are these kids?
We had 30 in our graduating class. How many did you have?
We had more than you had in the school. We had 127 in my graduating class.
Can you imagine? Well, I think, too, during the war, all the boys had gone in the service, so there was one class, there was only girls graduating that year.
And I remember, I think it's a 1945 yearbook that shows the display that they had at the Academy listing all of those who were Westford Academy graduates and who were done serving in the armed services. Do you remember that?
And I think one of the most interesting things was that D-Day, I will never forget. Anthony G.L. Brackett was our principal, and he came out and he said at 6 o'clock this morning, our troops were landing in Normandy, and we're all saying, where's Normandy? We had no idea. And it was very sad because back then, we didn't have television, so the only way you got news was like weeks after it happened, Pathé News in the movies. So there were people that were crying, and you didn't know whether people, if anyone were missing. Everything was censored. It was a really, my years in Westford Academy were very sober. There was a lot of sadness, and we just, I don't know, it wasn't that we didn't have a good time, but we didn't have the fun that they have today.
And with a war going on, and so many people, and some of the reports coming back of people you knew, it said you knew everyone in the village, and there are memorials listed for those who did give their lives, or far away from their families. I could think of my Uncle Donald, who was captured by the Germans in 1944, and my dad telling me about, when he was reported he was missing in action, and his sister's crying, and my grandfather saying, he's missing. That means there's still a chance. So, but that kind of a pall, I imagine, hung over the academy.
Yeah, and then there was rationing. We didn't have any buses. We had to walk. If you stayed after school, you had to walk home. Mm-hmm. There were no tires. I don't think anybody in the village had a car. So we had B&M buses coming through. Yeah, there was a lot of rationing. We all had ration books. And one of the interesting things was, how everybody had a class ring with a gem in it? Well, ours was just plain gold. There were no stones.
So the war ends in 1945. Celebration?
I remember everybody being down in Forge Village. They were singing, they were dancing. I was babysitting upstairs where Frank Manonial is now. I was babysitting a family up there, and I'm looking out the window, and they're all singing and dancing and drinking, and it was a crazy night in Forge Village, yeah.
I'm sure it was a crazy night all over America at the time. Well, let's move on, Mick, to a couple of other, we talked about Sullivan Shore, but in the same area, there was the Abbott Hall, which became Murray Hall.
Right. Well, and when for Abbott's, we had vaudeville shows, we had cowboy shows. I always remember the White Azaleas. Every year, St. Catherine's put on a minstrel show. We had movies Thursday night and Saturday and Sunday, and we had movies 3 weeks after Lowell. So everybody had showers at wedding showers. There was a cafeteria Spud Daly had, and it was very, very active. And downstairs, underneath, they had dressing rooms with running water, and it was really nice. All velvet chairs. Yeah.
That's right. Those maroon velvet chairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, they ended up at the Hattawan Lodge over in Littleton, by the way. When I became a Mason, I walked in, I said, boy, these chairs look familiar. I remember them from the Murray's dances in the 60s, and sure enough, that's where they came from after they had torn the place down. So, but you could almost call it a community center at the time. A lot of activity,
We didn't know there was such a word, but
yeah. Moving a little bit further down, there was the office, just across from the mill. Could you talk a little bit about the
robbery.
The robbery.
Yeah, my sister-in-law Blanche Wilk was down there. All the girls had to lay down on the floor, and Gertrude Fletcher, who was the matriarch down there, I don't know if she was head bookkeeper. They lived in that big house up here in Westford. She said, I am not getting on the floor. But they got robbed. It was sad. And interesting enough, the fella Mahoney that was the ringleader, he used to deliver Coca-Cola and that, so he got very friendly and he started dating some of the girls, so he knew when the payroll was going to be there. Yeah, but they caught them up in Fitchburg.
Yeah, I heard that there was the relation to. I also learned as we were doing research that there had been a break-in back in 1917, and the watch guard was Edmund Pendlebury. You must have been Roland's father.
Yeah, but he lived right where the Granville Monument is now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's been a couple of break-ins there.
I wasn't there in 1917.
Yeah. You weren't there when the train wreck occurred in 1921, but you were there in 1962.
I know, I kid me, that was such a mess, yeah.
Two major train wrecks that occurred over the years, and there's some pictures of that within this booklet as well. So, so that takes us down. We go to the canal, we go across the canal and the railroad tracks, and then we get to downtown Forge Village with all of the stores. I think of Scotty's. Do you remember Scotty's being built?
Yeah, Rich Scott, yes, I remember when he got that. Yeah, and then Danny O'Donnell bought it. Yeah.
So you actually remember the garage being built in the 30s?
Yes, I do. And the post office.
Okay, the post office being built, yeah. The fire station being built in 1940, being moved from the end of Oak Street, the wooden to the brick building in 1940.
And I don't know if anybody has pictures, but that was the funniest little fire station up in by Oak Street. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your experiences in the stores in the village, and whatever stores you honored, and some of the characters who ran these stores, some of the individuals. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the first name where the pizza places now was the First National, and Frank Sugar was the manager. And then the Clover Farm store at one time had a wall in between where the village store is now, and Dick Spinner had his very first ice cream place there. The Clover Farm was on the right. In the back was Wyman's Lunch. They called it a lunch, but it was a saloon. And everybody, but kids went in there, everybody could go in there. And then to the left, Harry Brown had a little store, and it was almost like a forerunner of a hardwood store. And then it became a barber shop, and it's long gone. And then
That was the building that was between those two buildings, correct?
And then there was the economy store that Ollie Reeves was a manager, and then that became the second Dick Spinner, and then it became Dougie Johnson's real estate.
In the 70s,
Now
yeah.
Frank Manoni lives there. Yeah.
So there was always stores in the village. The Wyman's Lunch you talked about, for those who may not know who Hoppy Wyman was, the Hoppy Wyman was the one who created Wyman's Beach,
Yeah.
that became
He was
infamous,
also a selectman.
and he was a selectman as well, very key individual. I went to school with his daughters, but very influential. But that's where he started, in this little Wyman's Lunch. 3 rooms, I remember you telling me.
They had 3 rooms. The middle room had the bar, and women did not go there. The right was where the kids, we would go in and get hamburgers and fish, or fish and chips and that. And the other room, all the men played cards in, and women did not go in there either.
What happened to it?
It burned.
Do you remember when?
No.
Christmas Eve, Christmas morning,
Okay.
1953, I believe it was.
54 maybe, because I was pregnant. Yeah, it could be 53. I was having a baby.
I'm almost sure it was 1953, yeah. You know, it's interesting, Mickey. I remember seeing an advertisement. Rich McLaughlin and I were going through some of the old newspapers, and there was an advertisement at Christmas time about all the stores. And so many stores were listed: Merry Christmas from Spinners, and Merry Christmas from the Clerk store,
Yeah, we had the drugstore.
and the drugstore, and all of that. And then that was during the 50s and then into the 60s. Okay, and then you began to see some changes. Billy's Barbecue, which was over at where the pizza place is now, ceased to exist then. And from there, after Billy's Barbecue, and I guess that my question, you know, because I moved into Forge, hung around in Forge with a group of people, and it's changed. But you said you have a couple of friends, Diane Holmes, okay, who graduated in 1959, and Patsy Mulligan, who graduated, I think, in 55.
Pauline Milo.
And Pauline Milo. And their experience in just 10 years was much different from yours.
I know, when we talk about things on Bradford Street and Pond Street, you would never believe it was the same place. What I was talking about in the 10 years that happened, the changes, it's just amazing. And now, 10 years later, you don't know anybody.
When I moved on to my street, okay, back in 1978, I knew everyone, and you know, the Crickets lived next door, and Spud Daly was across the street, okay, and the Mulligans were still there, and all those names that I mentioned here,
Yeah.
and they were all gone, and they've been brought in with young families. It's one of the things where I found a change. Going a little further up, Mick, okay, I want to talk about a couple of more institutions. The Elks Club.
Yeah, well, that used to be the Abbott Worsted bowling alleys, and when we had the hockey rinks, the Forge Village Arrows played across the street where the houses are there now. George Haley ran the concession stand. The bowling alleys, you had a men's group, you had a women's group. High scorer got a box of chocolates. That was a big deal. I even set up pins.
Oh, I can remember setting up pins there once, just before they tore the bowling alleys out. But by the 60s, I was going to dances there.
And they had the big pool tables.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
So that remained kind of an institution, but in a different sense, because it was the Elks. It was no longer the Abbotts.
I was there in 1967 on a Friday rainy afternoon when they tore it down.
Oh, not the entire place.
Well, they tore everything down but where the house is.
Yeah,
now.
where the houses are now, yeah. Moving further up, Mick, two institutions that I think you saw develop while you were there. That's the Franco-American Club,
Yeah.
okay, and the VFW, okay? You saw those coming in. The Franco-American was 1938. Did you yourself spend much time there?
Yeah, we all did because it was all our teenage dancers were there. All the, what do I want to say? The suppers like the Memorial Day or, I'm trying to think of one. They had whist parties. St. Catherine's every Friday had a whist party there. The French people had classes there. Roger Martin had a dance group there. There was a lot of activity there. And then I started the Golden Age Club, and that was where all our meetings were. Yeah. Okay. And I have to say, I'm the Golden Age Club, I am the proudest of all the things I've ever done, only because I got all nationalities from all 5 sections of town belong to that club. We had 350 members at one time.
That's very impressive, Vicki.
It is. I am more proud of that of anything I ever did.
Of course, the Franco-American Club's still there. It doesn't seem to in the same kind of gatherings that I know that they have, wedding receptions and so on. But when I go back to the 60s and I think of going across the street to the firemen's musters and the clam bakes, and it just seemed like in the 60s and the 50s, every weekend, if it wasn't the Elks Club or the VFW or the Franco-American or the fire department, almost every weekend during the summer, there was some kind of activity going on there.
Even the winter, there were dances every weekend. I don't know who sponsored them, but they were there. Yeah.
And I think people were less mobile at the time. They weren't headed to Winnipesaukee, or if they went to Hampton Beach, it was for a week. But they didn't own houses there, so the people in the mills, this was their time of escape on the weekend.
A lot more community, especially Fortune Granville. We seem to do a lot of things together, whether it be dances or whist parties or shows,
Which kind of brings me to one of the questions I have. You've been very active with St. Catherine's. I mean, from all the time I've known you. And there was a large Catholic population within Forge Village, mainly coming from those immigrants who had come in to work the mills. But in the middle of Forge Village, you had St. Andrew's.
Right.
Was there much activity at that church?
Yeah, those women made the best pies I ever ate. They would have a lot of suppers, and we all went to them. I remember Mrs. Dundas and Mrs. Cosgrove. Yeah.
So there wasn't like, well, they're the Protestants, you can't go there?
No, we never felt that way. No. I never felt there was any prejudice even till I got up to Westford Center, to be very honest.
Okay, that's interesting, yeah. And I found the same thing growing up in Graniteville, that there was, the Catholic kids and the Protestant kids within my grade school classes. We didn't know one or the other, quite frankly, who they were, and it was never brought up, really. Well, that's interesting, Mick. Let me ask you, and kind of as we wind down, I guess we've covered pretty much all of Forge Village, and the people from your lifetime. Were there certain people, village people, that inspired you?
I guess everybody. I had so many people that we used to ask questions all the time, and I babysat a lot. So I don't know, you just learned a lot of things from people, and there isn't anybody you couldn't ask. I think even when I worked in the mill as a checker, I was a senior in high school, and I would get off the bus and I would work till 11 o'clock at night. And I learned so much from all those people. I would just talk to them, and I don't know. It would be hard to pick who I learned the most from.
That's interesting. They say it takes a village.
That's true.
And I think Isn't that a perfect example?
Yeah, and what's interesting is when I got married, people didn't have much money, so Mary Merrick would go around and collect $1 from everybody. They gave me a card, there were 96 names on it, and one person, everybody gave $1. Mary went and did the shopping. I still use the baking, the thing she gave me. They gave me a Bissell carpet sweeper, a puff. I'm trying to think of all the things they gave me, but she went out and she spent $96 on all my shower gifts. You know, everybody, because I think everybody got married. They didn't have much money, so they all just gave $1.
I mentioned who would have inspired you because as I look at, your service to the community, it was town aid at one time, and so you looked over the welfare department at one time when things were a little different here in town. You were the veterans agent at one time. You got involved with housing. You were through community teamwork. All of this was to help people.
Well, housing was my first thing because I noticed that the one thing we needed more than anything was the immigrant people. They didn't have a lot of money, and a lot of them didn't even qualify for Social Security back then. So they needed places to go, and my first thing was to get housing. And I've been doing housing ever since.
That's why they're naming that place after you, Mickey. I know that I had spent some time in the Housing Authority as well. But what I'm saying is you dedicated your life to assisting people in one way, shape, or another, and quite frankly have been an inspiration to many of us to look at the contributions. I know looking at myself, people would say, what inspired you? I got into the business I did in politics because of a guy like Phil Peralt, Forge Village guy.
Exactly.
And Phil, I can remember my dad saying, well, you get this problem, we'll go see Peralt. Yeah. And he was kind of the go-to guy in a lot of ways, and Phil helped a lot of people. And I wanted to kind of be like that, and be like you, Mick, too, in a lot of ways, too. I
think in all honesty that a lot of it came because when I had the Golden Age Club and we wanted to go on trips, and Archie Kennefick from Lowell said to me, you can get money from matching funds from the state. And I said, how do you do that? And he said, well, you need a council on aging. And I said, what's the council on aging? He said, I'll tell you. So we got the council on aging. Then when we wanted to do housing for the elderly, somebody said, well, you need a housing authority. I said, well, how do we do that? So it wasn't that I was that smart. It was just when I wanted to do something, I found out you had to have certain things. And the stuff we did back then, with all the rules and regulations today, we wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
We started the Well Ulster Clinic. We didn't ask anybody. I asked Linda Lawler. We got the Elks, and we got a nurse and a doctor, and we just did it. We didn't ask anybody. Today, your hands would be tied. Yeah.
And in some ways, those regulations put in place because somebody got hurt along the way. And I mean, can you imagine Doc Blaney, giving out?
He delivered me.
I was going to say, isn't he the one that would reach in his pocket? Was that Doc Cowles and say, from his dirty pocket and say, take a couple of these and you'll be okay?
I can remember my mother having a sore throat, and she said to me, go down as Dr. Blaney, he must be in Wyman's, ask him to give you some of those pink pills for me. So I went in and I just asked him, I said, my mother has a sore throat. And he went, and he gave me a handful of pills and I went home with them.
Yeah, how things were different, huh?
A little bit different today.
Yeah. Kind of wrap things up. You're married. Where'd you meet Lenny?
I met Lenny at the old time dances at Chelmsford Town Hall.
Okay.
I was going with his brother, and then I met him.
Interesting. I like Lenny. Those of us who knew Lenny, was a great, great, great guy. Your kids all live close by?
Yeah, they all live now. There's only one lives in Lancaster. The rest of them are all in Westford.
In the house you were born in and grew up in?
And the house I was born in, I sold to my grandson Jimmy, and so it's still in the family. Yeah.
And Palamo Street, I know that Palamo Street looks much the same, you know, even though the house has improved. And I think of Graniteville, where I grew up. I can remember my brother Doug coming back from the Navy and driving down and saying, you know, this town has changed so much. But geez, if you go through Graniteville and Forge, it's like going back in time, and they haven't changed in so many ways. So, but there's been additions. And we'll kind of wrap things up. You know, you often hear people in town say, well, see, they built another thing over on 110. That's it. The town, you know, that's changes the town completely. Or when they put in the houses out on Howard Road. I think it was you told me that when they put in Abbott Street back in
I thought my world had come to an end because that's where we played, up in those woods.
So those challenges are the same challenges the town and the new people face today. So, Mickey, what do you think the biggest challenges are for the town today?
I would probably say the cost of living. Yeah, it really is, because the kids today, well, again, they're all into electronics, so we didn't have any of that stuff. You know, I think it's not as simple. We grew up, it was very simple. I think it's complicated now.
You're glad you grew up the period you did, didn't you?
Am I what?
Glad you grew up in the period that you did?
Yes, I am. I don't think I could handle today. I have all I can do with that computer. I don't know what's going on.
Thank you very much, Mick. I really appreciate you giving the time. And I'll tell you that this woman, when I treated her house yesterday to kind of wrap things up, she showed me her Christmas list. And out came this thing, and it must have had 50 names on it. 41. Well, okay, I was close. 41 different names, and she was still going out to make sure every one of those great-grandkids, grandkids, her kids, and I guess anyone else that's you were associated with got something. So.
And I'm an only child.
An only child.
Yeah, so Abu Ben Adam, may his tribe increase.
All right, that wraps things up. Thanks again, Mickey, and hopefully we'll get some other icons to sit with us and talk about Westford.